I was standing in my parents' kitchen when my mother laughed and said, "Let's not start rumors at the table," and everyone nodded like that settled it. Jason squeezed her hand, Emily's, and told me to stop being dramatic. Emily smiled at me over the rim of her wine glass, calm, warm, victorious. And in that moment, I realized I was the only person in the room who knew the truth, and everyone else had already decided I was lying. My mouth was open, my chest burning, but no sound came out. I could hear my heartbeat louder than my own thoughts. Emily's knee brushed Jason's under the table, affectionate, possessive. He looked at her like she was the safest place in the world. When I said, "I'm not making this up," my Aunt Linda sighed and said, "Why would anyone lie about something like this?" As if the question itself erased everything I knew. They didn't ask what I'd seen. They didn't ask how I knew. They asked why I was trying to ruin dinner. Emily tilted her head and said softly, "I think she's confused. She's always had a problem with boundaries." It landed exactly where she wanted it to. Jason bristled, defensive, loyal. "That's my wife," he said. "She would never do that." The word never slammed into me like a door. I looked around the table, my father staring at his plate, my mother avoiding my eyes, cousins suddenly fascinated by their phones. Everyone knew something was wrong. No one wanted it said out loud. Silence wasn't ignorance. It was a choice. Emily met my eyes again, just for a second. The smile disappeared. What replaced it wasn't fear. It was certainty. She knew the family would protect the version of reality that hurt the least. And she knew that meant sacrificing me. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about how far people will go to keep the peace, even if it means calling the truth a lie. From the outside, our family looked flawless. The kind people pointed to and said, "That's how it's supposed to be." Sunday dinners. Group photos on Facebook. Birthdays where everyone smiled too wide and hugged too long. Jason and Emily were the centerpiece of it all, the couple everyone admired. Stable. Successful. Untouchable. Emily curated that image like it was her full-time job. She remembered everyone's birthdays, brought homemade desserts, posted carefully filtered photos with captions about gratitude and love. She called my parents Mom and Dad like she'd been born into us. When people talked about her, it was always the same words: sweet, grounded, perfect for Jason. Jason thrived in that reflection. He loved being the man with the perfect marriage. He talked about Emily the way people talk about winning the lottery, like he couldn't believe his luck. And our family absorbed that narrative because it felt good. It was comforting to believe one thing in our lives was solid and safe. Cracks existed, but they were inconvenient. Emily disappearing during family gatherings to take calls. Jason brushing it off. Her phone always face down. Jason joking about how private she was. Privacy sounded healthy. Trust sounded mature. Nobody wanted to look closer. In our family, appearances weren't just important, they were protection. We didn't confront. We smoothed over. We reframed discomfort as misunderstanding. If something threatened the picture, the instinct wasn't to investigate. It was to erase it. That's why my words sounded like vandalism. I wasn't just accusing Emily. I was scratching at the surface of a story everyone depended on. A story where nothing ugly lived underneath. Where loyalty mattered more than honesty. Where love meant never asking the wrong questions. Looking back, I understand why they clung to that version of reality. It was easier. Cleaner. Safer. But families built on appearance don't collapse loudly. I didn't want to know. That's the part people never believe. I wasn't snooping or hunting for proof. The truth found me because I was close enough to see what everyone else explained away. Emily and I spent a lot of time together at first. Jason worked long hours, and she leaned on me: coffee dates, long walks, late-night texts about how lonely marriage could feel. She framed it as vulnerability. I took it as trust. When someone opens the door like that, you don't expect to find lies stacked behind it. The first moment came quietly. We were at a bar downtown, and she stepped outside to take a call. I followed a few minutes later, looking for the restroom. She didn't see me at first. Her voice had changed, lower, softer, intimate. She laughed in a way I'd never heard her laugh with Jason. When she noticed me, she jumped, then smiled and said it was just a coworker. Too fast. Too practiced. After that, things stopped lining up. Stories shifted. Timelines blurred. She'd tell me one version of her day and Jason another. When I mentioned it casually, she corrected herself without blinking. People think lies are loud. They're not. They're smooth. They fit just well enough that you doubt your own memory. Then there were the looks. The way she scanned rooms, always alert. The way she guarded her phone like it contained something fragile. The sudden changes in routine she explained with vague excuses. Nothing that screamed affair. Everything that whispered something is wrong. What made me certain wasn't a single moment. It was accumulation. A pattern you can't unsee once it forms. I started paying attention not because I was suspicious, but because my body reacted before my mind did. Tight chest. Knots in my stomach. That instinct people dismiss as paranoia until it's right. I realized the truth because I was close enough to hear the pauses, see the rehearsed smiles, feel the dissonance between who she claimed to be and who she was when no one important was watching. The hints were everywhere once you knew how to look. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just small, uncomfortable moments everyone rushed to explain away. Emily started missing family events with excuses that never stayed consistent. A migraine one week. A work emergency the next. Jason covered for her automatically, like it was muscle memory. She's exhausted, he'd say. You know how hard she works. And everyone nodded, relieved to have a reasonable answer. She stopped posting Jason as much. When I noticed, my cousin laughed and said, "That's healthy. Not everything needs to be online." When Emily did post him, it felt forced, overly polished photos with captions about gratitude, like she was compensating for something invisible. There was a night she came to dinner an hour late, flustered, perfume too strong. Jason joked about her getting lost. She laughed too loudly. I caught my mother watching her, eyes narrowed just for a second, before she looked away and asked someone to pass the salad. Her phone buzzed constantly. She never checked it in front of Jason, but the moment he left the room, her attention snapped to the screen. When he came back, the phone disappeared. No one commented. Silence was easier than implication. Once, at a barbecue, I saw her across the yard, angled away from the group, typing with a smile that didn't belong to the moment. When she noticed me watching, the smile vanished. She slipped the phone into her pocket and asked if I needed help with anything. The message was clear. Don't look too closely. I mentioned one of these things, just one, to my aunt. She waved it off. You're reading into it, she said. Marriages go through phases. That sentence became the family's shield. Any doubt could be tucked neatly behind it. What hurt wasn't that they didn't see the signs. It was that they did, and chose comfort over curiosity. Each ignored hint became another brick in the wall of denial. And behind that wall, the truth kept growing, patient and unstoppable. By then, I didn't suspect anymore. I knew. Not in a way I could explain cleanly, not in a way that fit into screenshots or timelines, but in the quiet, heavy way knowledge settles into your bones. That was the problem. I had no proof that anyone would accept. No messages. No photos. No dramatic reveal. Just a growing certainty shaped by patterns and pauses, and the way Emily's stories kept collapsing under their own weight. In our family, certainty without evidence was treated like hysteria. Every time I considered speaking up, I ran the conversation in my head. How do you know? Because her explanations never match. That's not proof. Because she's lying to your face. That's your interpretation. The truth didn't stand a chance against that logic. I started questioning myself instead. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was too sensitive. That's what gaslighting does. It doesn't erase the truth. It exhausts you until you're too tired to defend it. Emily never denied anything directly to me. She didn't have to. Her confidence did the work for her. Jason remained oblivious, proudly so. He talked about trust like it was armor. If you don't trust your spouse, what do you have? He'd say. I'd nod, swallowing the urge to scream. Trust had become the excuse no one challenged. The loneliness crept in slowly. Knowing something dangerous and having nowhere to put it. I couldn't warn Jason without being asked for proof. I couldn't gather proof without becoming the villain everyone already expected me to be. So I carried it alone. Every family dinner. Every laugh that felt too loud. Every moment Emily played the perfect wife, knowing I was the only one watching closely. Knowledge without evidence isn't lighter, it's heavier. Because you're not just holding the truth. You're holding everyone else's decision not to see it. Knowing the truth didn't make speaking easier. It made it terrifying. Once you realize how little people want to know, you start measuring every word. I rehearsed conversations in my head I never had. Imagine Jason's face hardening, my mother's disappointment, the collective sigh of a family forced to confront something ugly. The risk wasn't just being wrong. It was being alone. I tested the waters carefully. Small comments. Questions wrapped as concern. Doesn't it bother you that Emily's never around lately? The responses came fast and sharp. Don't start. You're overthinking. Why are you so focused on her? Each answer trained me to be quieter. The fear wasn't dramatic. It was practical. I knew what would happen if I spoke without proof. I'd become the problem. The troublemaker. The jealous sister who couldn't stand her brother's happiness. Families don't punish liars first, they punish disruptors. Emily seemed to sense my hesitation. She became warmer with me in public, more affectionate when others were watching. A hand on my arm. A compliment slipped into conversation. It was a warning disguised as kindness. See how reasonable I look? And it worked. The more perfect she appeared, the smaller I felt. Every attempt to imagine confronting her ended the same way, with her calm denial and everyone else's relief at having an easy answer. So I stayed silent, not because I doubted myself, but because I understood the cost of speaking. Silence became a form of self-preservation. But it came with its own price. Watching someone I loved live inside a lie, and knowing I was helping maintain it. That was the fear, not of being wrong, but of being right and losing everything because of it. Silence didn't stay passive for long. It became enforced. It started subtly, the way pressure always does in families that value harmony over honesty. My mother pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You seem tense lately. Maybe you should let things go." Let things go like it was a bad habit, not a moral weight crushing my chest. My aunt was more direct. "Whatever you think you know," she said, lowering her voice, "it's not your place. Jason is happy. Why would you take that from him?" The implication was clear. Truth was a luxury we couldn't afford. Even my father, who rarely intervened, warned me gently. "Families survive by choosing their battles," he said. "Some things do more damage when they're said out loud." I remember thinking how strange it was that the damage already existed, but somehow, naming it was the real threat. The pressure wasn't just verbal. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Invitations felt cautious, conditional. I could sense the unspoken agreement forming around me. If she keeps pushing, we'll have to push back. Emily never confronted me. She didn't need to. Others did it for her. When someone else carries the burden of silencing you, the manipulator stays clean. Untouchable. The message grew clearer by the day. My role was to protect the family's peace, even if it meant betraying my own sense of right and wrong. Speaking wasn't framed as honesty, it was framed as cruelty, as selfishness, as instability. I learned that silence isn't always chosen. Sometimes it's negotiated, pressured, guilt into place. And the more people benefit from the lie, the heavier that pressure becomes. By then, I wasn't just afraid to speak. I was being trained not to. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already on the outside. The pressure to stay silent had worked too well. People stopped asking how I was doing. Group chats went quiet when I contributed. Family plans were made without me and mentioned later as an afterthought. No one said I was being excluded, but I felt it in the careful politeness, the emotional distance that hadn't been there before. I started doubting my place in the family. Not because I'd done anything, but because knowing the truth had marked me. I carried it like something contagious. People didn't want to hear it, and they didn't want to hear from me. At gatherings, Emily flourished. She laughed easily, moved through the room like she belonged everywhere at once. Jason stayed close to her, protective, proud. Watching them felt surreal, like observing a performance everyone else had agreed was real. When I tried to connect, just as a sister, a daughter, I was met with caution. Conversations stayed shallow. Any hint of seriousness made people uneasy. It was as if they were afraid I might say something wrong simply by being myself. The isolation wasn't loud. It was quiet and persistent. I had never felt more alone while being surrounded by people who shared my blood. What hurt most was realizing this was the cost of awareness. Not proof. Not confrontation. Just knowing. The truth hadn't freed me, it had cut me off. And in that isolation, one thing became painfully clear. The family didn't need me to be honest. They needed me to be quiet. Silence didn't freeze the lie. It fed it. The longer no one challenged Emily, the more confident she became. What started as careful omissions turned into bold rewrites of reality. She spoke freely now, no longer checking who might be listening. The lie had survived its most dangerous phase, the one where doubt still existed. She leaned harder into the role of the devoted wife. Public affection with Jason became almost theatrical. Hand-holding, inside jokes, stories about their strong communication. People smiled, relieved. The performance worked because it gave everyone what they wanted, reassurance. Jason repeated her words like facts. He defended her without being asked. Emily's been under so much stress, he'd say. I don't know how she does it all. Each defense tightened the knot in my chest. The lie wasn't just hers anymore. It was becoming his. And every time someone praised her, I watched the story cement itself. It wasn't just believed, it was rewarded. Silence had turned a fragile deception into a shared narrative. Emily noticed me less now. I was no longer a threat. Once you stopped speaking, people stopped worrying about what you might say. That indifference hurt more than her manipulation. It meant the lie no longer needed to defend itself against me. What terrified me most was how normal it all felt. The family adapted, adjusted, learned how to live comfortably inside something false. That's how lies survive, not through force, but through patience. I realized then that truth doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It waits. And the longer it waits, the more damage it collects. I didn't choose the moment to speak. The moment chose me. It happened at another family gathering, one that looked identical to all the others. Same table. Same laughter. Same careful avoidance. Jason was telling a story about a future Emily had already rewritten, plans, promises, assumptions built on something that didn't exist. Everyone listened, smiling, investing in a future that felt like a lie pressing against my ribs. Then Emily said something small, almost careless. A detail about a night she claimed she and Jason spent together, one I knew he'd been out of town for. I watched Jason hesitate, just for a second, before accepting her version. That pause was new. Fragile. Dangerous. Something in me broke. I felt it physically, the weight of all the swallowed words collapsing at once. My hands started shaking. My heart pounded so hard I thought someone might hear it. I realized that if I stayed silent now, I wasn't just protecting the family. I was actively participating in the lie. I tried to breathe through it. Tried to remind myself of the consequences. But there was a different fear now, heavier than isolation. The fear of becoming someone who watches quietly while someone else's life is built on deception. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said, that's not what happened. The table went silent. Every face turned toward me, shock replacing comfort. Emily froze. Jason stared at me, confused, wounded. I knew in that instant there was no going back. Whatever happened next, the silence was over. And for the first time in a long while, the truth had air. Once the silence broke, it couldn't be repaired. Jason asked me what I meant, his voice tight, controlled in the way people get when they're afraid of the answer. Emily recovered quickly. She laughed lightly and said I was mistaken. She's confused, she told him, reaching for his hand. The same line. The same calm. But something had shifted. The room no longer felt safe for her story. I didn't launch into accusations. I couldn't. Instead, I spoke slowly, carefully, laying out what I knew, not as conclusions, but as facts that refused to align. Dates that didn't match. Calls that happened when Jason wasn't there. Stories that changed depending on who was listening. Each sentence felt like stepping onto thin ice. Emily interrupted, corrected, minimized. She always had an answer. But for the first time, Jason didn't jump in to defend her. He listened. Really listened. His face changed not to anger, but to confusion. And confusion is dangerous to a lie. Then Jason did something none of us expected. He took out his phone. He checked his calendar. His travel records. A photo timestamp. Small things. Ordinary things. But together, they formed something Emily couldn't smooth over. The air grew heavy. My mother covered her mouth. My father looked away. Emily's calm finally cracked, not into hysteria, but into stillness. The kind that comes when there are no more versions left to offer. She didn't confess. She didn't have to. The truth had assembled itself without permission. No one spoke for a long time. The lie didn't explode. It collapsed. Quietly. Completely. And in that quiet, everything changed. The truth didn't land all at once. It rippled. At first, there was shock, the kind that freezes people in place. No one moved. No one spoke. Jason stared at the table like the answers might rearrange themselves if he didn't look up. My mother kept shaking her head, whispering no, 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 as if repetition could undo what had just happened. Then came denial, quieter but more determined. There has to be an explanation. People make mistakes with dates. This doesn't mean anything. The same people who had once demanded proof now scrambled to reinterpret it. They weren't protecting Emily anymore. They were protecting themselves. Accepting the truth meant admitting they'd helped bury it. Emily finally spoke, her voice thin. She cried. Not loudly. Just enough. Tears without words. It was a last defense, and some of them leaned toward it instinctively. Comfort was familiar. Reality wasn't. Jason stood up abruptly and left the room. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. No one followed him. We all knew this was something he had to face alone. I expected relief. Vindication. Something. Instead, I felt hollow. The truth had come out, but it hadn't brought peace, only wreckage. People avoided my eyes again, but differently this time. Not with dismissal. With guilt. The kind that doesn't apologize right away. Shock fades. Denial lingers. And in that space between them, families decide what they're really made of. The shift didn't happen dramatically. It happened quietly, in the way people started looking at me. Suddenly, my words carried weight. Conversations paused when I spoke, not to silence me, but to listen. The same relatives who once warned me to stay quiet now asked careful questions, as if afraid of what else I might know. No one apologized outright. Instead, they said things like, "I guess you were seeing something we weren't." Emily disappeared from the center of the room. Where she'd once been surrounded by warmth, there was now distance. People were polite but guarded. The charm still existed, but it no longer worked. Trust, once cracked, doesn't respond to performance. Jason avoided me at first. Not out of anger, but shame. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were red, exhausted. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say sorry. He just nodded, an acknowledgement that felt heavier than either. What unsettled me most was how quickly the family adapted. The story changed. People spoke in hypotheticals. In hindsight, there were signs, someone said. I always thought something felt off. The same signs they dismissed when I named them. I had become the one who knew all along. Not because I wanted that role, but because someone had to hold it once the lie was gone. It was strange to be believed after everything. Validation didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief. The roles had shifted, but the damage remained. Trust doesn't reset just because the truth finally arrives. It only reveals who is willing to hear it and when. The fallout didn't come all at once. It spread slowly, like a fracture you don't feel until you try to move. Jason stopped coming to family gatherings. When he did show up, he was quieter, older somehow. The confidence he used to wear so easily was gone. He and Emily were working things out, then taking space, then no one said anything at all. The silence around their marriage was different now, no longer protective, just exhausted. Emily lost something she couldn't get back. Not the marriage, at least not at first, but her control. People no longer took her words at face value. Every story was met with a pause, a glance, an unspoken, "Is that true?" Reputation doesn't collapse loudly. It erodes. Our family dynamics shifted permanently. Conversations became careful. Trust felt conditional. Some relationships didn't survive the honesty. Others existed, but thinner, stretched by what had been revealed. And me? I wasn't celebrated. I wasn't punished either. I became a reminder of what happens when silence fails, of how long we can ignore reality before it forces its way in. There were moments I wished I'd never spoken. The damage was real. But so is the cost of staying quiet. Families don't break because someone tells the truth. They break because of what the truth exposes. I've replayed everything 100 times, wondering if there was a better way. A softer moment. A smarter approach. But the truth is this: lies survive because they're convenient. They stay alive because people are afraid of what honesty will demand of them. If you're the only one who sees clearly, it will feel unbearable. You'll be doubted, isolated, framed as the problem. That doesn't mean you're wrong. Being questioned doesn't invalidate the truth. It only proves how disruptive it is. Silence can feel like kindness, but it's temporary. The truth always collects interest. And eventually, someone pays the full cost.